Greetings and salutations. My name is Michael Schwahn, and this is your one-take review of Final Fantasy III Pixel Remaster. Couple of disclaimers, first off being that I am a huge Final Fantasy fan. I have been all of my life. I've played almost all of them at this point, and now this one is one of the last ones that I get to mark off the list. I'm a total tool when it comes to this series and this franchise, okay? I try everything with this brand on it. No, pretty much all of it. I even tried like that horrible, crappy Battle Royale game that was locked on mobile phones, Final Fantasy VII First Soldier. Still, if it would have been on Steam or just even just PlayStation, something not a phone, I think it would have done better, but that's a different conversation. Now, there are two Final Fantasy games that I haven't ever finished. Sort of. One of which is Final Fantasy III, which we have finished and are now reviewing, and the other of which is Final Fantasy IX, and I still refuse to finish that game for reasons that should be in another video. Final Fantasy III, for the longest time, it felt very unapproachable, okay? There wasn't many ways to play this game, and none of the ways to play the game felt good, okay? Because there was the original version that was on, I think it was the first one to make it to the Super Nintendo, but I'm not sure because it never got released in the West, and there were ways to like emulate it and stuff, but it was ancient and it just didn't age super well. And then there was the 3D version that used those really bad looking 3D models for the the DS remakes that they did for 3 and 4. And it runs and it's slow feeling, and they tried to like retroactively like inject some story into it by giving the characters names, and it just doesn't look good and it doesn't play good, and they added some mechanics into it that just made the game even worse, and we'll talk a little bit about those later. And then we got the Pixel remasters, and I know there was a lot of like conversation about these because when they were first announced, they were only coming to Switch and PC, and everyone was like, yo, what? Why? Where's like the console versions? And they were, no, it wasn't even Switch, it was PC and mobile, and they were like, oh, well, you know, later. And later did come, and so now it's available on PlayStation and Switch, although RIP to Xbox. And I had Final Fantasy III Pixel Remaster on my Steam wishlist for a while because I hadn't actually played through it because of reasons we already talked about, and I mentioned it to a friend of mine, friend of the channel, Foorants. There's a link to their channel down in below the like button. They were like, here, I'll just gift it to you, and I was like, well, crap, now I have to play it. And we got through it, okay? We got through it. So the premise of Final Fantasy III, it is an old JRPG, which means it has a very basic story. And I mean old. We're not talking like PlayStation 1 era. That's when shit started to get really good storytelling-wise. There was some really good ones on the Super Nintendo, but for the most part, early Super Nintendo or even in the NES days, story very, very small. So it's super basic. You are the 4 warriors of light. The warriors of light respond to the crystals, discovering that they're the warriors of light. And then you have to go around the world, find all 4 crystals to restore light to them so that you can save the world, okay? And the DS games, they expanded on the story a little bit. Instead of you just right at the beginning choosing the names for the 4 characters, they gave the characters names like Luneth and Ark. Pixel remasters are based off of that original release, so all of that extra stuff from the DS remakes, not here, okay? And that's perfectly fine. There's not really a whole lot else to say about the premise of this because it is super, super simple, but we'll talk about some of the story beats later on in the review. But the main part when it comes to these old RPGs is the gameplay, and it is old school turn-based RPG, which means that you don't have even an active time battle system. Just you queue up actions, everyone goes based on, I'm guessing, speed, and then afterwards it just stops, okay? And enemies' turns are blended in based through, and that's all you got. And this is the baseline that they'd been working with for a while. But one of the reasons that Final Fantasy III is such a heralded game in the history, not because of its gameplay, but because of the history that provided, is that Final Fantasy III, the core system of it is the job system that led to what we got in Final Fantasy V, and ever since forward, not in all the Final Fantasy games, but as a standard function here and there dotted throughout the Final Fantasy system, whether it's Final Fantasy V, Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy XIV, And this is the origin of that system, and it does deserve credit for that system, but there are some issues with the first iteration of the job system within the Final Fantasy franchise. So you start as freelancers, although I think they're called Onion Knights actually in the Pixel Remaster, whereas in the DS remakes, Onion Knight was a special, like really hard to get endgame job. And as you progress through the game, each crystal will grant you new jobs. There are a couple that are discoverable, but for the most part, you just unlock new jobs as you progress through the story. But the weirdest part about this is that your player level and your job level are different things, okay? So you can have your first person in your list be level 23, but they're only a level 5 knight because they just switched to knight. And initially I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Sure, okay. But there's a few nuances about it that are strange. So one, the job that you are when you level up your player, that can influence your stat increases, which largely means that you want the character to stay in the relative category. So if you start out as a black mage, you want to go to like the geologist, and then you want to go up to, I can't remember what the top tier mage is called. And that way they keep on improving on like their int stats and stuff so that their spells work better. You want to go from like, is it start out as monk? It's like monk to thief to ninja, or however it goes, so that you keep on stacking agility so that that person stays in that niche. And different jobs have different abilities. Makes sense, you know. The thief, they can do steal moves, and then you got the mages that they cast either white magic or black magic. You got the knights that are able to use like guard effects, so they'll take hits for other people, and they have different options. And the problem is that some of these options also feel like requirements, but we'll talk about that more in just a second. Because one of the things that I want to mention about the DS remakes that thankfully is not present here in the Pixel Remaster is something called job adjustment, okay? In the DS version of the game, every time you change jobs, you would go into the job adjustment phase, and your stats would drop. You would lose effectively like 2 or 3 levels worth of stats until you adjusted to the new job. And you didn't even gain progress on that job until you got through the job adjustment phase. And I don't know what the point of that was, because all it does is slow your progress and discourages job dancing, which I don't understand, because I feel like you would want people to explore new jobs and see what the other jobs do, and this just actively hinders that. Thankfully, that is not present in the Pixel Remaster, and you can just change your jobs freely. But the problem is the jobs kind of suck, okay? And this is where we're going to talk about those abilities that we mentioned. And I'm sure you're already typing out, be like, nah, man, you just need to just max out the ninja, and then you need to max out the samurai, and then you can throw shurikens that deal 999 damage. I get it, okay? There are things that the game doesn't show you that unless I went and read a guide on GameFAQs that I would not know. I wouldn't know just how broken the geologist is, or how to make the scholar not feel like crap, okay? But for the most part, most of these jobs feel like crap. And unfortunately, some of these jobs feel like they are required for fights, because there's some fights that are just so brutally difficult if you do not have 1 to 4 copies of this very specific job in your party to be able to get through this boss fight. And like, I understand wanting to like get to utilize mechanics and stuff like that, but it's not like, oh, I need to use this specific spell, because when you change jobs, if you haven't put any work in that job, your guy sucks, okay? He is trash, which makes sense. You know, you're settling into the new job. You got to get some experience under your belt. I get it. But when it's that hard of a requirement in some of these fights, I don't get it anymore. The other thing is that leveling in this game is strange, all right? Because like a normal turn-based RPG, when you kill things, you get experience. But when you kill things and get experience, that experience only goes towards your player level, your top level, your global level, right? It goes to take your player from level 53 to 54, not your job as a knight going from level 27 to 28. Instead, the way that you level up jobs is that your character has to take a certain number of actions as that job. And by certain number, I mean 8. It does not matter what level they are. Once they have taken 8 actions, they will gain a level in that job. And this is strange because in a way it feels like learn by doing, of like, oh yeah, you're getting better at being a ninja and better at being a scholar because you have done things as that job. That as a core makes sense. But mechanically, 8 actions, it does not matter what the action is. So the best way to level up is to go out on the world map, find some really shitty enemy, and just guard 8 times. Just guard, 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 and then kill it, and then you level up. And you will gain 1 level in that job, and you can only ever gain 1 level in the job per combat. So it isn't like if you have a really long drawn out boss fight that you could go from job level 3 to job level 8. No, you will only go from 3 to 4, even if you did 56 actions as you slowly attritioned your way and chipped away that boss's HP, 1 level. So the most effective way to do a job is to do what I just said. Just go out in the wild, waste a whole bunch of time just blocking against random trash mobs so that you can get your levels up for a job and then be able to progress. And the problem with all of this is it makes the jobs feel like a chore rather than being this really interesting mechanic, okay? Because if you compare it to Final Fantasy 5, 12, or 14, when you discover a new job, it's cool, it's exciting, the jobs feel approachable. You're like, you know what? I might not stick with it, but I want to try it out. Final Fantasy 3 does not do that. And outside of the most direct upgrades, and that means like going from, you know, the Black Mage to the Geologist to Magus, I think is actually what it's called, you don't want to try to play around. It feels like you are actively punishing yourself for doing so. And most of those jobs feel junk. There is probably half of them that are just not good. Maybe there's a way to make them good, but it is not through just standard forms of play. Or maybe it requires a certain stat break to get through. But that's not something you're going to know unless you read a guide or unless you spend a whole lot of time in the game. There are a couple of old mechanics, though, that are present in Final Fantasy III that I would like to see more of. The most prevalent of which is multi-hit attacks. So if you have a high enough agility stat, you will use your weapon multiple times. You will see 3 hits, 4 hits, 11 hits. And this is what, like, there's a problem with attack spam in turn-based RPGs. Most of the turn-based RPGs in general, you can get away with just spamming the attack button. Outside of very specific fights, boss fights, or some unique encounters, every enemy within reason can just be slaughtered down by just spamming the basic attack button. And you can get away with that pretty heavily here too, but it feels different because you have this, like, you'll see the enemy, you'll see your guy just swing his sword 19 times, and you're like, damn, and you just hear the slashes going across, and it's like 14 hits, and your knight just hit 3 times for 100 damage, your thief rocks up, 17 hits, 1,714 damage, you're like, damn, and of course the enemy dies, you're like, that was cool. And even towards the end of the game, that still feels good. It's still a basic attack, but because the attack is hitting multiple times, it feels good. It looks good. It was well executed. And I don't know when they stopped doing that, but I think that would still be a cool thing to still do. Another thing is usable items, and I don't mean potions, I mean weapons and armor, okay? Because almost a good number of the weapons that you find in Final Fantasy III, you can go into the item menu, go and select the item and use it. And it'll, like, the staves normally will cast a spell, or like there's a sword called like the Defender that'll cast Protect on an ally. And this is so cool, okay? This is such a nice mechanic to have because it gives you options, okay? It gives you options to save resources. It gives you options to expand what your characters can do based on the equipment that they're wearing. MP in Final Fantasy III is extremely limited and difficult to restore. And so if you have an item that casts a spell, that means that you can cast that spell forever because the spell is just in the item, and that's really cool. And I have seen this in some other games, but it is very, very limited. The most recent of which was Dragon Quest XI, but when I say it's limited, it is this big. Like, only like 3 or 4 items have it, one of which is required for story progression, but otherwise very, very small. One of the other things I want to give this credit to, and it's a credit to old design and a credit to the simplicity of the design. the world direction and exploration that this game has. There are no quest markers in this game. There is no shining blip on a world map. There is no compass that has a little star on it. Nothing like that. You have no thing that is just the carrot on the stick. There is no like button to pulse out to give you Witcher sense, to show you the path that you need to follow. There's no glowing dots. Nothing. There is nothing that is giving you a direct, this is where you need to go to progress next. But it's always really easy and very clear of where I need to go. You just ask an NPC. You walk up and you talk to an NPC and they're like, oh no, the king is gone because he went into the cave and never came back. And you're like, oh, well, I should probably go get him then. Like, it's very clear and obvious what you should be doing, and if at any point you seem confused, if you just talk to the NPCs around town, within 1 or 2 sentences, they will tell you, one of them will anyway, exactly what you should be doing and exactly where you should be going in a way that feels really natural without it feeling gamey, which is really impressive and I think is a testament to simplicity in games of the time versus everyone needing like a really clear thread that takes them to the next thing, because games are so focused on world building and having these really in-depth characters and stories, and there is something that is valuable in those, but this game, despite being so old, had this really impressive level of immersion by it just not feeling video gamey, which was really cool because it's one video game, okay? I like that a lot, and I don't know if it's something that is still actually executable in today's video game landscape, especially as we have really detailed environments. I talked about how, oh, that clearly means I need to go in this cave, right? Yeah, sure. Well, you step out on the world map, and it's like, there's one cave. There's one. And it's very obvious because all of the mountains have the exact same pixel art used to create the mountains. And then there's a little black archway that you're like, that is definitely the cave. I will go that way. Whereas when we have these really big, beautiful modern games and designs and stuff like that, it's a lot harder to make that clear. So I'm not sure if there's a way that that could be feasibly done, but I definitely appreciated and enjoyed it in this game. Visually though, Final Fantasy 3, it's a really old pixel art game, okay? The Pixel Remaster, they definitely cleaned things up and it looks great. I know that there was a really big amount of discussion around the font in this game, and I know that the PlayStation 4 and Switch versions, they have font options. The version I played it on Steam through my Steam Deck, and it did not have those options. And sure, it was like a modernized font, wasn't all pixely, but I didn't see it as a big deal either. Maybe it's because I just wasn't nostalgic enough, but I didn't care. Everything was really easy to navigate to visually in this game. We talked about how things are very consistent in their visual design. Walls look like walls, but that also means that if there is a hidden area in the wall, it's pretty obvious. As long as you're paying attention, you'll be able to see like the cracks in it. When you walk through, it lights up the hidden pathways so you don't gotta wander around in the dark. And it makes it where just like navigating the world and the enemies and everything is really easy. It holds up really well, I think, as long as the art direction is one that you are, what's the word that I want? Palatable to. That you're palatable to this design. I think you're going to enjoy your time a lot in terms of the world that you're in. Now let's talk about audio and dialogue, okay? This game is old, there is no voice work, and even beyond that, there is very limited dialogue. This is a very simple story, okay? And it works, but there's too many attempts, I feel, at the story having weight that it hasn't earned, okay? As you go through this, you will have a lot of loss of NPCs, okay? But somebody making a grand sacrifice when you've only known them for 5 minutes, it doesn't feel important. It has no weight. It doesn't feel like you lost anything because you never really gained anything. And they try to get these big story moments a lot. Like each city or each zone will have these like really quick rise and really quick falls as you're progressing through the story, and it just doesn't work because This game isn't very long, and each of these sections is even shorter. You can get through a whole like city section or dungeon or whatever in under an hour. And so when you get through them and you meet somebody and lose somebody within that hour, you're like, hey Bob, bye Bob, whatever. It's like, it feels like these characters were meant to be people that were added onto your party, and they probably would have been if this was a game that was made in like the mid to late 90s instead of, you know, the late 80s. And so it hurts. It hurts a lot because it feels so meaningless. That said, music's great. Square Enix has been fantastic at music since the very day one. There's really good sound effects. We were talking about the multi-hits, and the multi-hits, you hear the extra hits and they layer on top of one another. It's really satisfying. There's really good visuals for the spells. There is good audio for the spells. It's a really good visual and audio presentation. But as we come to a close for this one-take review of Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy III for the longest time was at the very bottom of my list in terms of like, hey, how would you rank the Final Fantasy games? What's your favorite versus the one you like the least? Final Fantasy III was always at the bottom, and honestly, it's probably going to stay there. I have not finished Final Fantasy IX yet, but even with what I have experienced of Final Fantasy IX, I would still put it just above Final Fantasy III. Not by a whole lot currently, but very bottom is still probably going to be Final Fantasy III. It is historic for its job system, and I am thankful for it for that, because Final Fantasy V is one of my favorite Final Fantasy games in the franchise. Final Fantasy XII is fantastic. You get a lot of character identity out of the job system in Final Fantasy XIV, but it's just not here. I enjoy Final Fantasy 1 and 2. Older games, though it's not even like, oh, a modern gamer can't appreciate the classics. No, I just don't like this game very much. It was trying to do a lot of things, and it achieved them, but they just are clunky and awkward and weird. As much as I don't care for this game, though, I don't think it's actually terrible. And when I say it's at the bottom of my Final Fantasy game list, it's creating a strong foundation, because the worst game in this franchise, when it comes to the mainline numbered entries, is still not a terrible experience, all right? If you want a number, I'm gonna have to give it a 6 out of 10. I don't think that there is any arguments that it can really get any more than that, even if you're trying to give special passes and exceptions. It's not terrible, but it's definitely the lowest baseline that we are willing to accept when it comes to going, it's all right, rather than going, nah, this shit sucks, okay? I don't recommend this game unless you want to play it for historical value. Like, you're like, yeah, man, I need to do a Final Fantasy Legacy. Like, go for it. Go have your Legacy experience. It's not going to take you very long. I think my playthrough was like 13 hours, okay? This game's not exactly like rocking the playtime, okay? But I do not recommend it in a general sense. Go play Final Fantasy V instead. If you want to experience an old school Final Fantasy game and be like, let me get my teeth into that job system, Final Fantasy V is where it's at. It's where it has gameplay-wise, story-wise, experience-wise, everything. Job systems improved in every way. Don't touch this. Go play Final Fantasy V, whether it's the crappy, like, pixel-smoothed version or the pixel remasters or whatever. That's the game that you should go play. But let me know what your thoughts are. If you played Final Fantasy III like way back in the day, how do you feel about it today? Have you played many of the other Final Fantasy experiences? If this is your first time with Final Fantasy III, how is it sitting for you? I would love to hear from you. Put all your thoughts down in the comments below. We do have some upcoming reviews. Our next review is going to be on the Resident Evil 4 remake, because we're just in an age of video game where all they're doing is selling us our childhoods. And I'm both here for it, but also ready for some new things as well. But we'll talk more about that when we get to Resident Evil 4. Now, also, if you can't tell, I like to talk, and I'd love to talk some more if you want to talk with me. Two great places to do so are Discord and Twitter, and we do stream on Twitch 4 days a week, and I would love to see you there. If you enjoyed this video, please leave it a like. If you want to catch future videos, please subscribe to the channel. Do watch one of the other videos on the channel, or if I see you in the live stream, thank you, and enjoy.